Hi, I'm Dr. Brahm Kleinman, a Roman historian and a consultant for the video game Historia, Roma Aeterna. In early January of 49 BCE, the Roman Republic was in crisis. The Senate, led by Rome's two elected consuls, declared a state of emergency against one man. All other business was suspended. Other politicians pursuing their own agendas found that nobody cared. The only question anybody cared about is what should be done about Gaius Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar was a Roman politician who'd spent the last 9 years as governor of different regions of Gaul, which is basically the equivalent of modern France. Many other governors would spend their time, dealing with civil administration. Caesar did some of that. But more than anything, he was a conqueror. He spent 9 years essentially on campaign, conquering one tribe after another, adding more and more territory to the Roman Empire. And it got to the point that the Gauls put aside their differences, their many, many tribes came together to unite against Caesar, to unite against a common enemy. But Caesar even managed to defeat that coalition in 52 BCE, and the result was that now Gaul was conquered by the Romans. For the Gauls, this was a great tragedy. They lost their independence. They had to pay taxes to Rome. Many of them were slaughtered. Many of them were enslaved. For Caesar, this was a moment of great glory. He had become one of the greatest commanders, generals, conquerors of his generation. He had, in fact, defeated an enemy that lived on in the Roman imagination as the boogeyman, because the Gauls, 450 years or so earlier, had captured the city of Rome. And so Caesar said that he was just taking revenge for that sack. But Caesar bragged about some other things too. He was the first Roman to cross the Rhine River and go into Germany. He was even more impressively the first Roman to cross the ocean and invade Britannia twice. What he found there was a wet, far-off island. He didn't accomplish much there, but it gave him a lot of prestige. And now, for the first time in his career, he began to outstrip an old friend, ally, his former son-in-law, in fact, named Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great. Now, Caesar had a lot of popularity in Rome. His conquests had made him very rich, but he also had a lot of enemies who opposed him, enemies he'd made throughout his political career. People like Cato the Younger, who proclaimed himself to be a defender of old-time Roman values, said that Caesar had committed many crimes in his time in Gaul and even before that, and they wanted to bring him to trial. And so now a conflict, a crisis developed. As Caesar's time as governor in Gaul was running out, what would happen when he returned to Rome? Would he just go back to being a private citizen? The issue was that Caesar in Gaul had armies. Pompey in Italy also had armies. And each of these armies, many of these soldiers, were loyal to one commander over the other. So civil war was definitely in the air, and it was something that the Romans had experienced in the past 30 years over and over and over again. Ambitious generals or politicians rallying soldiers or parts of the Roman populace for conspiracies, violence, for their own private agendas. Over the year 50 BCE, the conflict developed. Should Caesar lay down all of his armies before he returned to Rome? Should he become a private citizen? Would he be allowed to stand for election directly after being governor? All these issues were being debated, and many compromises were offered. There were many senators who wanted to avoid violence at all costs. But there were also many hardliners on both sides who, one way or another, refused compromise. And so in early January, the Senate declared that state of emergency, saying that unless Caesar disbanded his armies and returned to Rome, he would be considered a public enemy. Caesar, on the other hand, refused. And so just a few days later, maybe on January 10th or 11th, Caesar took a final step, a game-changing moment. Caesar stopped at the Rubicon River, which was the boundary between his province of Gaul and Italy, technically any Roman commander under arms was not allowed to cross that boundary. But that is what Caesar did. He crossed the Rubicon River, which engulfed Rome in a civil war, lasted for about 19 years, and was the final nail in the coffin for the Roman Republic. Crossing the Rubicon was a game-changing moment, and we still use the expression crossing the Rubicon for that kind of moment, a moment when the decisive decision is made, which changes the course of history. The irony is, at the time, people who were alive don't really mention this moment at all. Caesar in his writings doesn't talk about it. Other writers of the time don't mention it. It only seems to become a significant historical moment when later Greek and Roman writers, biographers, historians write about the Civil War, and they turn it into the decisive action to begin the Civil War. Of course, there's the famous story that Caesar, before he crossed the river, is supposed to have hesitated one way or another till he finally made his decision and said, "Alia jacta est," the die has been cast. And then he crossed. But the stories got more and more extreme and elaborated over time. One writer says that the night before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he had a disturbing dream in which he was having sex with his own mother, which is a very bad religious omen. It's something that the Romans thought no one should be doing. And it symbolized, of course, the mother was Rome, was Caesar's motherland, and so he was defiling his motherland. A different author records a different, more cheery story, that as Caesar was approaching the Rubicon, he saw a godlike figure playing some kind of reed flute-like instrument. And the soldiers, Caesar's soldiers, went up to this figure, attracted by the music, and at that point, the divine apparition grabbed one of their war trumpets, played the war note, and then Caesar knew that the gods were blessing him. They sanctioned him crossing the Rubicon, and so he did. Now, you don't need to believe either of those stories, but in those two stories, kind of religious omens, you get two very different visions of Caesar. On the one hand, you get Caesar as the defiler of his country, maybe the selfish general who's willing to plunge Rome into a civil war for his own ambitions. On the other hand, in the story about the flute player, you get the image of Caesar as the champion of the gods. He's just doing what the gods want him to do. And so these stories raise different views of Caesar and raise many different questions, which I'll hope to answer in some of these following videos. Whose fault was the Civil War? Was it Pompey, who couldn't allow his former protege to become more glorious than him? Was it senators like Cato the Younger, who thought that Caesar was breaking the law, but were so hardline in their opposition that they kind of put him into a corner where he could do nothing else? Or was it ultimately Caesar's fault for putting his own selfish interests above the interests of the Senate and people of Rome? Or was crossing the Rubicon even that significant a moment? Was it really the moment that destroyed the Roman Republic? Or was the Roman Republic already in a state of collapse, and this crossing, the Civil War, was just one more symptom? But even going before that moment, who actually was Gaius Julius Caesar? How did he get to the point where he was in Gaul for 9 years? Who was Pompey? How did they become allies, and how did they become enemies? So that is the question I'm going to start addressing in the next video, where I'll talk about Caesar's early life until he formed an alliance not just with Pompey, but another very wealthy, powerful Roman named Crassus.